You know that feeling when a story grabs you so hard you forget to blink? That's why we're here. This channel is for people who are hopelessly and helplessly addicted to a good story. Whatever you're in the mood for, we've got it. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, and welcome to your new addiction. This is Story Junkie, and trust me, you're going to want to stay. This is a Story Junkie original. I used to believe that love was the safest place a person could be. That when you gave someone your heart completely, when you let them into your home, your bed, your business, your future, you were building a fortress, not opening a gate. I was wrong, and by the time I understood how wrong I was lying on a bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, my body convulsing with cramps so sharp they stole the breath from my lungs, listening to the sound of my mother-in-law humming cheerfully in the kitchen below me, making breakfast again. My name is Amelia Johnson. I am 41 years old. I built a 7-figure IT consulting firm from a single laptop and a dream I refused to let die. I have negotiated contracts with Fortune 500 companies, managed teams across 3 continents, and sat across tables from men who thought my gender was a liability and made them regret every syllable of their condescension. But I nearly lost everything, my money, my health, my sanity, and almost my life, not to a boardroom rival or a hostile takeover, to a woman who smiled at me over a dinner table and called me darling. Let me tell you everything. Aidan Johnston was the kind of man who made a room feel warmer just by walking into it. That sounds like something a foolish woman says in hindsight to explain why she missed the warning signs. Maybe it is, but I want to be fair to the girl I was when I met him, because she deserves that fairness. She wasn't stupid or naive, she was simply, and I understand this now with the compassion I couldn't afford to feel then, lonely in the particular way that very driven people become lonely. The kind of loneliness that sneaks up on you between achievements in the silence after the applause. I met Aidan at a tech networking event in downtown Chicago 7 years ago. I was 34. I had just signed my third major client, a logistics company that would later account for a third of my annual revenue, and I was celebrating quietly at the bar while everyone else networked loudly around me. He sat down 2 stools away, loosened his tie, and ordered a whiskey without looking at the menu. Then he looked at me and said, "You look like the only person in this room who doesn't want to be here." I laughed. I hadn't laughed like that in months. Aidan Johnston was 37 then. He was the co-founder of a mid-sized product design firm called Logic Line. Not a tech company exactly, but adjacent enough to orbit the same events. He had warm brown eyes, a voice like dark wood, and a way of listening that made you feel like the most interesting person alive. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He remembered details and he followed up. We dated for 14 months. We were married in a small ceremony in Asheville, North Carolina, attended by 30 people, surrounded by mountains and autumn fog, and I wore a dress I still consider the most beautiful thing I've ever owned. I was happy. I want to state that clearly because what comes later can distort the memory of the beginning. I was genuinely, completely happy. I should also tell you about his business because that matters. That is, in many ways, where the rot began. Logic Line had been profitable when Aidan and I met. Not spectacularly, but steadily. His co-founder, Quinn Blaine, handled the operational side while Aidan led creative direction. They had a good rhythm. But 2 years into our marriage, Quinn left amicably, he said, citing a desire to start fresh, and Aidan never quite found his footing after that. The contracts started drying up. A major client walked, a product launch failed. Aidan poured money into a rebrand that generated buzz but not revenue. By year 4 of our marriage, Logic Line was hemorrhaging cash. I helped. Of course I helped. He didn't ask. I helped because that's what you do. You shore up the people you love. I gave him access to a joint account I'd established with a generous deposit. I connected him with 2 of my corporate contacts. I let him use my accountant, my attorney, my network. I did it without conditions because I believed in him and because I believed that what was mine was ours. That belief, it turns out, was the unlocked door that let everything else in. I need to tell you about Charlotte. Aidan's mother was 64 years old, a retired school administrator from Knoxville, Tennessee, with silver hair she wore in a careful bun, reading glasses she kept on a beaded chain around her neck, and the specific brand of charm that only women of a certain generation and disposition have fully mastered. the charm that is indistinguishable from warmth until you look for it in her eyes and find that it isn't quite there. I had met her 6 times before the visit that changed everything. Twice at holidays, once at our wedding, once when she came for Aidan's birthday, and twice more in passing. A long weekend here, a dinner there. She was polite to me, always polite. She remembered my coffee order, she complimented my home, she asked thoughtful questions about my business with an expression of genuine interest. But I noticed things, small things, the kind you don't mention because they sound petty when spoken aloud. The way she subtly redirected conversations with Aidan so that I was adjacent to them rather than part of them. The way she looked at my house, our house technically, though I'd bought it 3 years before Aidan and I met, with a proprietary admiration, as though she were assessing an inheritance. The way she talked about Aidan's first serious girlfriend, a woman named Priya, with a wistfulness she never applied to me. He was so devoted to Priya, she said once, in a tone that could have been nothing, could have been everything. She adored him too, a real partnership. I smiled and changed the subject. I was good at that. What I didn't know then, what I would learn much, much later in a lawyer's office with documents spread across a glass table, was that Charlotte Brown was not simply a doting, slightly territorial mother. She was a woman with a plan, a detailed, patient, monstrous plan, and it had been in motion longer than I ever imagined. She arrived on a Wednesday in late October, rolling a single large suitcase up our front walk with the confident stride of someone who owned the destination. Aidan met her at the door with a hug that lasted long enough for me to stand in the hallway slightly to the side, waiting. "Amelia!" She turned and opened her arms. Her perfume was floral and heavy. "You look tired, sweetheart." It was the first thing she said to me. I told myself it was concern. The plan had been a week. She had her own room, the guest suite on the second floor, with its own bathroom and a view of the garden, and for the first 3 days it was manageable. She cooked dinner twice. She kept the common areas tidy. She went to bed at 10 o'clock and was up by 6, which meant that by the time I came downstairs each morning, she had already made coffee and was sitting at my kitchen island with a book, comfortable in a way that was almost territorial. On day 5, she mentioned offhandedly that she'd been having some lower back pain. The drive from Knoxville had been hard on her. She might need to see a doctor. On day 7, the day she was supposed to leave, Aidan came to me in the evening and asked if his mother could stay just a little longer. A week, maybe 2. She wasn't well. She didn't want to make the drive alone. He'd feel better knowing she was here where he could keep an eye on her. I said yes. I said yes because she was his mother. I said yes because I was not a woman who would put her foot down over such a thing, not when it could be dismissed as selfishness or cruelty. I said yes because Aidan looked at me with those warm eyes and I wanted to be the wife he deserved. 2 weeks became 3. 3 became a month. And somewhere in that month, quietly, without announcement, Charlotte Brown stopped being a guest and started being a presence, a gravitational force, reorganizing the atmosphere of my home around herself. She rearranged my kitchen, just making it flow better, she said with a warm smile when I came home to find the spice rack relocated and 3 of my cabinet configurations reversed. She suggested, and then simply enacted, a new schedule for the cleaning service. She made comments about my diet, gentle and always framed as concern. "You're working so hard, Amelia. You should eat more. Here, I made this for you." Always, I made this for you. It started so gradually that I almost gaslit myself into believing it wasn't happening. The first thing I noticed was fatigue. Not the honest tiredness of a busy woman. I knew that tiredness. This was different. This was the kind of exhaustion that lives in the bones, that makes the simple act of standing feel like a negotiation. I was sleeping 8 hours and waking up as depleted as when I'd gone to bed. Then the weight loss began. I am not a small woman. I am 5'7", with the build of someone who runs 3 times a week and eats plenty. I had been roughly the same weight for a decade, but by the 6th week of Charlotte's stay, my clothes were starting to fit differently. My face looked drawn in the mirror. My assistant, Priya, not the same Priya, different woman, asked me with careful concern if everything was all right. "You look like you've lost weight," she said. "But you're eating fine?" I was eating fine, or I thought I was. Charlotte cooked often. breakfast especially. She was an early riser and seemed to take genuine pleasure in having breakfast ready when I came downstairs. Oatmeal, scrambled eggs, smoothies she made from scratch. She'd hand me a glass with the pride of someone doing something kind, and I'd drink it because refusing felt rude. The stomach cramps began in week 7. They would arrive without warning, usually in the evening or in the middle of the night. Cramping so severe I'd curl around myself in the bathroom, sweating and nauseated until they passed. My doctor ran blood tests. My iron was low. My liver enzymes were slightly elevated. She put me on supplements and told me to manage my stress. The memory issues frightened me most. I am a precise person. My mind is a filing cabinet, very organized, but I started losing things. Appointments, names, the thread of conversations I'd been in the middle of. I missed a call with a major client and had no memory of the scheduled time at all. I sent an email twice to the same person with slightly different content and didn't realize until they replied, confused. I was losing myself quietly in increments, and every morning Charlotte was downstairs making breakfast. I am a data-driven person. I don't leap to conclusions. I build cases from evidence, test hypotheses, eliminate variables. So I want you to understand the weight of what it cost me to say the sentence I said to Aidan on a Sunday morning in December, 8 weeks into his mother's stay, while he read the news on his tablet and I stood in the kitchen doorway in my bathrobe, pale and hollowed out, listening to Charlotte hum in the garden below. I think your mother is poisoning me. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. Aidan lowered his tablet slowly. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as carefully managed alarm. The look of someone who has decided in advance how to respond to something before it's been said. Amelia, hear me out, please. The symptoms started after she arrived. The fatigue, the weight loss, the cramps, everything tracks with the timeline of her being here. She makes my food. Almost every morning she makes something for me specifically. I've been to 3 doctors and no one can give me a diagnosis that makes sense. You think my mother, my 64-year-old mother, who drives 14 hours to spend time with us, is poisoning you. I think it's worth considering. You have always had a problem with her. His voice wasn't raised. That was worse somehow. You've never been comfortable with her being here. I've seen it. She's seen it. And now she's been here 2 months and you're... He stopped, then rubbed his face. This is a serious accusation, Amelia. Do you understand how serious this is? I understand that I am losing weight without explanation, that my memory is failing, that I am in pain almost every night, and that I would like my husband to take that seriously. I am taking it seriously. I'm taking you to a specialist, but I am not. I refuse to accuse my mother of something like this based on a suspicion you've constructed because you don't want her in the house. He got up. He kissed my forehead in a way that felt like dismissal. He said he'd call a GI specialist Monday morning. I stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to Charlotte hum, and then I let myself be afraid. Here is something I have learned about myself. When I am afraid, I work. I didn't argue with Aidan again after that morning. Neither did I mention my suspicions to Charlotte. I smiled over dinner. I thanked her for breakfast. I was warm and present and apparently untroubled, and I started building a case. The first thing I did was stop eating food Charlotte prepared for me. This required choreography. I developed a habit of coming downstairs before she was up, eating something quickly, and appearing to be finishing coffee when she arrived. On mornings when she'd already prepared something, I accepted it graciously and found ways to dispose of it when she wasn't watching. Within 10 days, my stomach cramps decreased. That was the first data point. The second thing I did was call my attorney, a formidable woman named Ava Marsh, who had handled my business affairs for 6 years. I didn't tell her my full suspicion. I told her I was having some health concerns that I was monitoring and that I wanted to make sure my legal and financial affairs were fully in order. She was thorough and efficient and asked no unnecessary questions. Good attorneys never do. While Ava reviewed my estate documents, I began quietly reviewing my joint financial accounts. What I found there was the second thing that cracked the world open beneath me. The joint account I'd established for Aidan to manage the business's cash flow concerns. I'd deposited $300,000 into it over 14 months. in portions large enough to be useful, but not so large as to require specific accounting, had been accessed in patterns I didn't recognize. Transfers to accounts that didn't belong to LogicLine. I'm a businesswoman. I understand that money moves in complex ways, but I also understand that money doesn't move without intention, and the intentions behind these transfers were not ones my husband had shared with me. Third thing, I hired a private investigator. His name was Robert Ambrose. He was recommended to me by Ava, which meant he was discreet, experienced, and expensive. I met him at his office, not near our neighborhood, on a Tuesday afternoon when Charlotte was at a doctor's appointment and Aidan was at a meeting that I now understand he may not have actually attended. I told him everything: the symptoms, the timeline, the finances, Charlotte's visit, and its extended nature. Robert listened without interruption, took meticulous notes, and then asked 2 questions. Does your mother-in-law have a history of similar behavior in any other context you're aware of? I didn't know yet. And your husband, do you believe he is aware of what may be happening to you? I looked at my hands, at my wedding ring, which had grown loose on my finger. I don't know that either, I said. I'm hoping the answer is no. It took Robert Ambrose 4 weeks. He was methodical and meticulous, and he delivered his findings in a 37-page document that he walked me through in person while I sat across from him and felt the floor of my life give way beneath me. Let me give you the relevant points. Charlotte Brown had a financial history that her careful presentation of genteel retirement had entirely obscured. She had been involved 12 years earlier in a civil case in Tennessee, a dispute over her late husband's estate that involved allegations of financial manipulation of an elderly relative. The case had been settled out of court. No criminal charges were filed. The records were sealed except for the civil filing, which Robert had obtained through public court databases. She had done this before, under different circumstances, but the same nature. The financial picture was worse. The transfers from our joint account led, through a careful chain of intermediary accounts, to an LLC registered in Nevada. The LLC was called Brightfield Consulting. It had 1 client, LogicLine, Aidan's company. It had 1 director, and it had 1 silent beneficiary, listed through a legal instrument that a Nevada business attorney would later describe to me as deliberately obscure but technically legal. The beneficiary was Charlotte Brown. Aidan had been routing money from our joint account, my money, the money I'd given to support his struggling business, through his own company into an LLC that funneled funds to his mother. Over 14 months, the total was $412,000. I sat in Robert's office and said nothing for a very long time. There's more, he said gently. I nodded. Of course there was more. He had obtained, through surveillance and a connection he declined to name, Charlotte's purchasing history from a period covering the 2 months prior to her visit and the 8 weeks of her stay. Among her purchases, made at a health and supplement store in Knoxville 6 weeks before her visit, were 3 items of particular interest. He couldn't prove what she'd used them for, but the purchases existed, the timing existed. The symptoms, which he had cross-referenced with a toxicologist he consulted independently, were consistent. Heavy metal exposure, long-term low dose, the kind that doesn't kill quickly, the kind designed to erode. My hands were very still on my lap. What do I do now? I asked. Now, said Robert. We make sure you're safe, and then we make sure she can't do this to anyone else. I checked myself into a private hospital 3 days later. I told Aidan I was going in for comprehensive testing, which was true, and that my doctor had recommended inpatient observation for 48 hours, which was also true, though the doctor making that recommendation was one I'd found independently, a specialist in occupational and environmental toxicology named Dr. Leona Phillips, who had been briefed by Robert and who took the case with the serious precision of someone who had seen things like this before. Dr. Phillips ran a panel I had not yet been given, a full heavy metal screen, urine, blood, hair. The results came back in 36 hours. Elevated arsenic, not the level of an acute poisoning, which might have been detected and treated already, but consistent with prolonged low-level exposure. Consistent, Dr. Phillips said carefully, with something administered regularly in food or drink over a period of approximately 8 to 10 weeks. This isn't environmental exposure, she said. The pattern is too regular and way too deliberate. I held the report in both hands and thought of Charlotte humming in my kitchen, thought of her handing me a glass smoothie with the warm smile of someone doing something kind. Here, sweetheart, I made this for you. I was in that hospital room, sitting upright on the narrow bed with my results folder in my hands, when my phone rang. It was Aidan. How are you feeling? How are the tests going? His voice was concerned, warm, the voice of a man who loved his wife. I thought about what Robert had found. I thought about $412,000. I'm okay, I said. The doctors are running some more panels. I'll probably be here another night. Mom made soup, he said. She wants to bring it by. That's sweet, I said. Tell her not to bother. Hospital policy. There was no such policy. I hung up and called Ava Marsh. Ava Marsh wasn't a woman who expressed surprise. She processed information with the steady efficiency of a machine designed for exactly this function. And when I told her the full picture, the toxicology results, Robert's financial report, the LLC, Charlotte's history, she was quiet for exactly 12 seconds before she said, "All right, here's what we're going to do." What we did was this. First, Ava contacted a forensic financial investigator, a man named Theo Barris, who specialized in untangling exactly the kind of layered financial structure Aidan and Charlotte had constructed. Theo worked quickly. He was able to produce documentation that established without ambiguity the chain from our joint account to Brightfield Consulting to Charlotte Brown. He could show the dates, the amounts, and the pattern. Second, Ava retained a criminal attorney, not for me, but to advise on what criminal exposure Aidan and Charlotte faced. His name was Reed Clark, and his assessment was direct. Charlotte faced potential criminal charges for what the toxicology suggested. Aidan faced potential criminal charges for financial fraud. The civil exposure was significant for both. Third, and this was Ava's particular genius, she moved to freeze my business assets and formally separate them from any joint marital exposure before any confrontation occurred. My company, my accounts, my intellectual property, my client contracts, all of it was legally ring-fenced in 72 hours. Whatever came next, Johnson IT Consulting was mine and would remain mine. Fourth, she drafted a letter to their attorneys. Because Ava Marsh had learned over 20 years of practice that confrontations accomplished very little, documentation accomplished everything. I need to tell you about the conversation with Aidan because it is the hardest part of this story to tell, and also the part I think matters most. I came home from the hospital on a Friday afternoon. Charlotte was in the garden. Aidan was working at the kitchen table or appearing to work, which I was no longer certain was the same thing. He stood when he saw me, came toward me, and put his hands on my shoulders. "You look better," he said. "I got some results," I said. "Can we talk?" We sat at the dining table, the same table where Charlotte had served me breakfast, dinner, the careful attentions of a woman who wanted me gone. I put the toxicology report in front of Aidan. I put Robert's financial report beside it. I put the Brightfield Consulting documentation on top of that. I sat with my hands folded and I watched my husband's face as he read. Here is what I hoped for. Even then, I hoped that his face would show shock. Genuine, unperformed shock. The shock of a man who didn't know. Here is what I saw instead. I saw a man who knew he'd been caught. It was subtle. It was the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for a moment and is now living inside it. His jaw tightened. His eyes went very still. He read the pages with the careful attention of someone cataloging what existed, not discovering what was true. He didn't say, "What is this?" He said, "Amelia, it's not what it looks like," which told me everything. "Tell me what it looks like," I said. The story he told me took 40 minutes. It had the texture of something partly true and largely constructed. The business had been failing worse than he'd admitted. His mother had offered a solution, a structure actually, that Brightfield had suggested, and he'd accepted without fully understanding. The money was meant to be temporary. He'd planned to repay it. He hadn't known. He absolutely had not known about her purchases, about her actions, about the supplements, about any of it. "She's my mother," he said, and his voice cracked. She said she was trying to help. She was poisoning me, I said. My voice was very calm. I had spent 10 days building to this moment, and I'd learned that calm was a kind of power. Slowly, consistently, in my own home. I didn't know. You knew about the money. He said nothing. You knew I was sick. You told me I was paranoid when I told you what I suspected. You defended her. I I need you to understand something. I leaned forward slightly. I loved you. I gave you everything you asked for and a great deal you didn't. I have documentation now, forensic documentation, of financial fraud totaling $412,000, and I have toxicology results that my attorney has already shared with a criminal law specialist. This conversation is not me asking you to explain yourself to me. This conversation is me telling you what comes next. Aidan retained an attorney by end of day. Charlotte, informed by Aidan that evening, retained her own attorney by the following morning. Robert Ambrose, monitoring communications at Ava's direction, confirmed that both calls were made. The machinery of consequence had been set in motion. I didn't speak directly to Charlotte again. There was no dramatic confrontation in my kitchen, no scene at my dining table, no moment where I faced her across a room and said the things I had imagined saying in the dark hours of my worst nights. What I had instead was a deposition, 8 weeks later, in a conference room at Ava's firm. If you made it this far, you already know you're a story junkie. Hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's feed that addiction together. A new story is always waiting for you here. Charlotte arrived in a steel grey blazer, her silver hair immaculate, her reading glasses on their beaded chain. She looked like someone's grandmother on the way to church. She sat across from me and Reed Clark, Ava and Theo Barris, and she folded her hands on the table with an expression of measured dignity. She said nothing that wasn't routed first through her attorney's nod of approval, but I watched her face when the toxicology report was placed in front of her, and I saw something I had not expected. Beneath the careful composure was a kind of contempt. Not contempt for being caught, but for me, specifically, for the kind of woman I was, the kind who builds things, who holds things, who doesn't yield what she has worked for, the kind of woman her son had chosen instead of the kind she would have chosen for him. I understood something in that room that I have carried with me since. Charlotte Brown didn't hate me personally. She hated what I represented, a woman who didn't need her son in order to survive, which meant her son needed me in order to survive, which meant Charlotte Brown was peripheral to the story of his life in a way she had never accepted and never forgiven. She had tried to remove me the way you remove an obstacle, quietly, gradually, in a way that would look like illness or decline, like the unfortunate deterioration of a woman whose body simply failed her. The audacity of it is almost incomprehensible, and yet when you understand the logic of entitlement, the logic that says I am owed what I believe should be mine, it makes a terrible kind of sense. The civil case settled 7 months after my hospital discharge. The terms were confidential, which is something attorneys negotiate as a matter of course. What I can tell you is that the financial losses I'd sustained were addressed, and that certain structures, including Brightfield Consulting, were dissolved. The criminal matter was more complex. The district attorney reviewed the toxicology findings and the purchasing records Robert had gathered. The challenge with long-term low-dose poisoning cases is evidentiary, proving intent, agency, and proving that the substance found in a victim's system came from a specific source. Charlotte's attorney was skilled and expensive, and he was very good at raising reasonable doubt. What he couldn't do was make the evidence disappear. Charlotte Brown was ultimately charged with 1 count of intentional poisoning and 1 count of elder financial fraud, the latter tied to a prior case that the investigation had reopened in Tennessee. She pleaded to a reduced charge through a negotiated agreement that included a 3-year supervised probation, a permanent restraining order protecting me, mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, and a civil judgment in my favor that her attorney spent considerable time arguing against. She didn't serve prison time. I want to be honest about that because this story is about truth. The justice system is imperfect. What it delivered was partial, real, documented, and consequential, but not the complete accounting I had sometimes imagined in the worst nights. Aidan and I were divorced within the year. His attorney negotiated the financial restitution on his behalf as part of the overall settlement. He acknowledged through that legal process that he had been aware of the irregular financial structure and had failed to disclose it. He didn't acknowledge knowing about his mother's actions toward me, and here is the truth I have made peace with. I don't know with complete certainty what he knew. I know what he did. I know he chose the wrong things when choosing mattered most. I know he looked at a woman in pain and called her paranoid because the alternative required courage he didn't have. Whether he knew she was poisoning me, truly knew in the daylight and deliberate way, is a question that lives in a part of the story I will never fully access. His culpability in the financial fraud is documented. His moral culpability in everything else lives in the space between what he knew and what he chose not to know. That space, I have found, is where the worst betrayals often live. Let me tell you about what came after, because stories like mine often end at the reckoning, and I think that's a disservice. The reckoning isn't the end, it's more like a door opening onto a longer road. Dr. Phillips monitored me for 18 months. The arsenic levels normalized within 4 months of exposure ending and treatment beginning. My weight stabilized. My memory, which had frightened me most, recovered almost fully. There are occasional gaps I've learned to work around, small shadows on what was once a very clear pane of glass. She told me I was fortunate. Another 6 months of what Charlotte had been administering, and the damage might have been irreversible. I sat with that for a long time, the mathematics of how close I came. My business had been protected thanks to Ava's speed and foresight, and I returned to it with the focused intensity of someone who has been reminded of what they almost lost. Priya, my assistant, had held things together with remarkable competence during my illness and the months of legal proceedings. I promoted her to operations director and gave her equity in the company. She cried. I did too, a little, though not in front of her. I moved. I left the house that had been my home, but that I could no longer enter without seeing Charlotte at the kitchen island, reading glasses on the beaded chain, making me something she said was good for me. I found a smaller place, a townhouse with too many windows and a garden I don't have the patience to tend properly, and I started learning what it felt like to be in a space that belonged entirely to me and no one else. I went to therapy. I want to say that directly because I know some people feel that is a private thing not to be spoken about, and I think that particular silence causes harm. I went to therapy because I had been betrayed by my husband, nearly killed by his mother, and had spent months distrusting my own body and mind. And those are things that leave marks that need attention. My therapist's name is Dr. Kira Ndubuisi, and she is brilliant and unsparing, and she helped me understand things about myself that I had been too busy or too defended to look at directly. One of the things she helped me understand is that my willingness to dismiss my own suspicions, to accept Aidan's reframing of my concerns as evidence of my own bias, wasn't stupidity. It was something more like love's grammar, the way long attachment teaches you to weight another person's interpretation of reality above your own. That's not weakness, it's the vulnerability that intimacy requires. What I have learned and what I am still learning is how to stay in that vulnerability without losing the thread back to myself. There are things I know now that I did not know then, and I want to leave them with you. I know that isolation is a weapon. When Charlotte extended her visit and reorganized my kitchen and positioned herself between me and the daily rhythms of my own home, she was doing something deliberate, isolating me within my own space, making me the outsider in my own life. Watch for that in any relationship, romantic, familial, professional. Watch for the person who slowly rearranges the furniture of your existence until you can't find the door. I know that dismissal is a tactic. When Aidan told me my suspicions about Charlotte were evidence of my long-standing hostility toward her, when he made my legitimate alarm into a character flaw, he handed her more time. Whether or not he meant to, he did. When you tell someone who is frightened that their fear is irrational, you aren't being rational. You are being complicit. Don't let someone else name your instincts as hysteria. Don't let someone else's comfort take precedence over your safety. I know that your body keeps a more honest record than your mind sometimes does. My mind was working very hard to find explanations that didn't require me to believe the unbearable thing. My body just kept getting sicker. When there is a gap between what your intellect is willing to accept and what your physical reality is insisting upon, the body is usually closer to the truth. Go to the doctor. Get the specialist. Push past the first answer when the first answer doesn't fit. I know that financial independence is not a luxury, it's a necessity. My business was the reason I could hire Robert Ambrose and Ava Marsh. It was the reason I could check myself into a private hospital and commission a forensic financial investigation. The women most vulnerable to the kind of predation I experienced are the women who have been carefully kept from financial autonomy. Guard yours with your whole self. I know that partial justice is still justice. It wasn't enough, it's also not nothing. Charlotte Brown won't do to another woman what she did to me without those records existing, without that judgment in place, without the paper trail that says, this happened, and it was not nothing, and someone noticed and named it and made it count. I know that survival isn't the same as victory, but it is the prerequisite for everything else. There is a particular taste, metallic, almost sweet, that sits at the back of your mouth when arsenic has been in your body long enough. Dr. Phillips told me about it clinically, but I'd noticed it for weeks before I knew what it was. I thought it was anxiety, or maybe it was the iron supplements. I thought it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. I think about taste a lot now. The way we swallow things that harm us because they're given to us by hands we trust. The way we mistake bitterness for flavor, harm for nourishment, poison for care. The way a woman can hand you something toxic with a warm smile and the language of love, and you will drink it because you've been taught that the love of a family is something you don't refuse. I don't eat food from anyone's hands without knowing exactly what's in it now. I mean that literally. I also mean it as a metaphor. I am Amelia Johnson. I am 42 years old. I run a company that serves 17 corporate clients across 4 countries. I have a therapist and an attorney and a private investigator I now keep on annual retainer because the world contains Charlotte Browns and I am not interested in being surprised again. I haven't spoken to Aidan since the divorce was finalized. I went back to Asheville last autumn, stood in the place where we'd been married among the mountains and the fog, and let myself feel the full weight of everything I'd lost and everything I'd kept. The loss is real. It doesn't dissolve into wisdom. It sits beside the wisdom like two things that have learned to coexist. Then I drove back down the mountain and went home to my house with the too many windows, and I made my own breakfast, and I stood at my kitchen counter and I ate it slowly, and it tasted like mine. If this story found you at a moment when something in your own life doesn't feel right, when you're being told that your suspicions are too much, that your instincts are unkind, that the person making you feel unsafe is the one who loves you, I want you to sit with this. You are allowed to trust yourself. You are allowed to get a second opinion and a third. You're allowed to consult a lawyer before you think you need one. You're allowed to notice patterns that make you uncomfortable and take them seriously. You're allowed to say something is wrong here, even when the person you love most is telling you that nothing is wrong. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It arrives in the language of love and care, in the voice of someone who has access to your home, your food, your body, your bank accounts. It exploits the very openness that intimacy requires. Protection isn't paranoia, evidence isn't accusation, and survival isn't selfishness. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today, because sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone we love is make sure they know they're not imagining it. Stay safe. Stay watching. This is Story Junkie, where every story is someone's truth.